Dr. Kim Tae-ho wiped the sweat from his forehead as he studied the data on his screen. The morning on Kepler 442b was always hot and humid. The twin suns made everything feel like being inside an oven. He had been working at this research station for 3 years now, studying the strange plants and animals that lived on this distant world. The station was small and simple. Only 12 humans lived here, far away from Earth and the busy space lanes. Tae-ho liked it that way. He could focus on his work without anyone bothering him. The other scientists were good people too. There was Park Min-soo, who kept them all safe. Lee Da-hee handled all their messages to other worlds. Choi Jun-woo fixed anything that broke, which happened a lot on this planet. Today started like any other day. Tae-ho was looking at samples of purple moss when the ground began to shake. At first he thought it was another earthquake. This planet had lots of them. But the shaking felt different. It came in waves like giant footsteps. Dr. Kim. Da-hee's voice came through the speakers. She sounded scared. You need to come to the main room right now. Tae-ho dropped his work and ran through the narrow hallways. When he reached the main room, he saw everyone gathered around the big window. Min-soo stood there with his hand on his weapon. Jun-woo was checking the defense systems. Tae-hee pointed up at the dark sky. Look, she whispered. Tae-ho looked up and felt his heart stop. Something huge was coming down through the storm clouds. It was bigger than their entire station. As it got closer, he could see what it really was, a Valkyrie. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Valkyrie. They were the most dangerous creatures anyone had ever found. They looked like dragons made of living crystal. Their skin could stop laser blasts. Their claws could cut through the strongest metal. Just one adult Valkyrie could destroy a whole city. But this was not just one. More shapes came down from the clouds. 5, then 10, then 20 massive forms. Each one was at least 50 meters long. Their crystal scales caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. Even through the thick walls of the station, Tae-ho could hear their deep rumbling calls. We need to run, Min-soo said. His voice was calm, but his face was pale. Right now. Get to the escape pods. Wait, Tae-ho said. Something about the Valkyrie seemed wrong. They were not attacking. They were not even moving toward the station. They just landed in a circle around it and stopped. The largest Valkyrie, covered in old scars, moved closer to the station. But it moved slowly, carefully. Its great head hung low. In its front claws it carried something small. What is it holding? Jun-woo asked. Tae-ho grabbed the viewing scope and pointed it at the giant creature. What he saw made his breath catch. The Valkyrie was carrying 3 small versions of itself. Baby Valkyrie. But something was very wrong with them. The little ones were barely moving. Their crystal scales, which should have been bright and colorful, looked dull and gray. Dark spots covered their bodies. They were clearly very sick. The adult Valkyrie set the babies down gently on the ground. Then it did something that no one had ever seen a Valkyrie do before. It looked directly at the station and made a sound. Not a roar or a growl. It was more like crying. It wants something, Da-hee said quietly. The Valkyrie began to scratch marks in the dirt with one massive claw. Even from far away, Tae-ho could see it was drawing simple pictures. A sick creature. A healing hand. A plea for help. That's impossible, Min-soo said. Valkyrie don't ask for help. They take what they want. But Tae-ho was already moving toward the door controls. No, look at it. Really look. The great creature's eyes were not the cold, hungry eyes that all the stories described. They were the eyes of a parent watching their children die. The Valkyrie around the station were not preparing to attack. They were waiting. Hoping. Doctor, don't even think about it, Min-soo said, stepping in front of the door. Those things have destroyed entire star systems. This could be a trick. Look at those babies, Tae-ho said. They're dying. And their parent came here, to us. Why would they do that unless they were desperate? Because they want to use us somehow. Min-soo replied. The lead Valkyrie made another sound, deeper and more painful than before. It nudged one of the babies with its nose. The little one barely moved. Dr. Song Hye-jin, the station's doctor, had been quiet until now. I've been studying the scans, she said. Those babies are very sick. Whatever is wrong with them, it's getting worse fast. They might not have much time left. Tae-ho looked around at his team. These people trusted him. They had followed him to this distant world because they believed in his work. Now he was asking them to trust him with their lives. We became scientists to learn about new life, he said. This might be the most important discovery in human history. The Velkari are asking us for help. Not demanding. Not threatening. Asking. And if you're wrong, Minsu said, then we die trying to save children. Taeho answered, I can live with that choice. Can you live with letting them die when we might be able to help? The room was quiet except for the sound of the storm outside. Through the window they could see the parent Velkari still waiting, still hoping. Finally, Heejin spoke. I took an oath to help anyone who needed medical care. I didn't put any limits on what species. Junwoo nodded. My job is to keep this place running so we can do our work. This feels like the most important work we'll ever do. Dahi stepped forward. If we're really going to make history, someone should record it properly. All eyes turned to Minsu. As security chief, he could override any decision if he thought it was too dangerous. For a long moment, he stared out at the waiting creatures. God help us all, he said finally, and moved away from the door controls. Taeho's hands were shaking as he began the process to lower the station's barriers. Outside, the parent Velkari seemed to sense what was happening. It lifted its great head and called out to the others. The sound that came back was not threatening. It sounded almost like relief. As the barriers powered down, Taeho realized that everything was about to change. Not just for them, but maybe for the whole galaxy. He just hoped they would all live long enough to see what came next. The Velkari waited patiently as the humans prepared to meet them. In all the stories and reports, no one had ever described patience as a Velkari trait. But then again, no one had ever seen a Velkari parent watching their children die either. Today was going to be a day that made history. Taeho just hoped it wouldn't be their last. The barriers hummed as they powered down. Dr. Kim Taeho watched through the reinforced glass as the massive Velkari parents slowly approached their station. Each step made the ground shake beneath their feet. Up close, the creature was even more amazing and terrifying than he had imagined. The Velkari's crystal scales caught the light from the twin suns and threw rainbows across the ground. Its eyes were larger than dinner plates, deep blue like ocean water. When it breathed, small clouds of glowing vapor came from its nostrils. This was a being that could level mountains, yet it moved with careful gentleness around its sick young. Medical bay is ready, Dr. Song Hee-jin said through the radio. Her voice was steady, but Taeho could hear the nervousness underneath. I've cleared out the main treatment room. It's the biggest space we have. The Velkari stopped just outside the station's main entrance. It lowered its great head and made a soft rumbling sound. Then very carefully it picked up the first baby Velkari in its massive claws. The little one was about the size of a large dog, but it looked so fragile. Its crystal scales had lost their shine and turned a sickly gray color. Dark patches covered its skin like some kind of infection. It barely moved as its parent carried it toward the humans. Door opening, Junwoo announced. The entrance to the station slid open with a soft hiss. Taeho stepped outside first, his heart hammering in his chest. The adult Velkari was even bigger up close. Its head towered above him like a building. One claw could easily cut him in half, but when their eyes met, Taeho saw only desperate hope. Easy, he said softly, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the Velkari or to himself. We want to help. The parent Velkari gently placed the sick baby on a stretcher that Junwoo had brought outside. The moment the little creature left its parent's claws, it made a weak crying sound that broke Taeho's heart. Let's get it inside, Heejin said, appearing beside them with a medical scanner in her hands. We need to figure out what's wrong. As they wheeled the baby Velkari into the station, something unexpected happened. The little creature's crying stopped. Its dull scales flickered with just a hint of light. Taeho noticed it first. Did you see that? He asked. See what? Heejin replied, busy checking her instruments. The baby. It seemed to get a little better when we brought it inside. In the medical bay, they carefully moved the young Velkari onto the examination table. The table groaned under its weight, even though the creature was just a baby. Hyejin ran her scanner over the small form while Taeho took readings with his own equipment. This is incredible, Hyejin whispered. Its entire body runs on some kind of quantum energy. I've never seen anything like it. The dark patches, Taeho said, pointing to the sick areas on the creature's scales. They're not just on the surface. They go deep into its energy system. The baby made another weak sound. Without thinking, Taeho reached out and gently placed his hand on its head. The crystal scales felt warm under his palm. Immediately, something amazing happened. The dark patches under his hand began to fade. The baby's scales grew a little brighter. Its breathing became easier. Taeho, Heejin said in a shocked voice. Don't move your hand. What is it? The readings. They're changing. Whatever you're doing, it's helping. Taeho kept his hand on the baby's head and watched his scanner. The quantum energy that Hyojin had mentioned was somehow becoming more stable. The dark infection was retreating from the area around his touch. How is this possible? He wondered out loud. I don't know, but we need to get the other 2 babies in here right away. Outside, the parent Valkyrie had been waiting patiently. When it saw the humans coming back, it immediately picked up the second baby. This one was in even worse condition than the first. Its scales were almost completely gray and it could barely lift its head. They brought it into the medical bay and placed it on a second table. Junwoo, who had been helping move equipment, accidentally brushed against the creature's wing. The same thing happened. Where his hand touched, the dark infection began to fade. Junwoo, keep your hand there, Taeho said excitedly. What's happening? You're healing it. Somehow when we touch them, we make them better. They brought in the third baby, which was the sickest of all. This little one was barely breathing. Its eyes were closed and its scales had turned almost black in some places. Dahi had come down to help, and when she saw the tiny creature struggling, she began to hum softly. It was an old song from Earth, something her grandmother used to sing. As her gentle voice filled the room, the baby's eyes opened. Its scales began to flicker with weak light. The quantum energy, Heejin said, staring at her readings. It's responding to sound too, to human emotions. Taeho felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying that we can heal them just by caring about them? It looks that way, but I don't understand how or why. They worked through the day, taking turns touching and speaking softly to the 3 baby Valkyrie. Slowly but surely the little creatures grew stronger. Their scales regained some of their rainbow shine. They began to move around and even made happy chirping sounds. The parent Valkyrie watched everything through the medical bay window. Sometimes it would make soft rumbling noises as if it was talking to its children. The babies would chirp back and their scales would glow a little brighter. We need to contact Earth, Dahi said as evening fell. This is the biggest discovery in human history. No, Taeho said firmly. Not yet. We don't understand what's happening. Until we do, this stays between us, but it was too late to keep it secret. Through the window, they could see more shapes moving in the sky. More Valkyrie were coming. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens of them. Each one carried sick babies. Word travels fast, Minsu said grimly, even among Valkyrie. By the next morning, over 50 adult Valkyrie had gathered around the station. They kept their distance, but they were clearly waiting for something. Waiting for the humans to help their children too. We can't treat that many, Heejin said. We don't have the space or the supplies. Then we'll have to find a way, Taeho replied. Look at them. They're not threatening us. They're asking for help. It was true. The mighty Valkyrie, creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years, sat quietly around the human station like patients waiting to see a doctor. Some of them had traveled from other star systems, carrying their sick young across impossible distances. Why us? Dahi wondered. Why did they come to humans? Taeho looked at the 3 baby Valkyrie, now playing gently with some simple toys that Junwoo had made for them. They were still weak, but they were alive. More than alive. They seemed happy. Maybe, he said slowly. They know something about us that we don't know about ourselves. Outside, the parent Valkyrie that had started it all lifted its head and made a long musical call. All the other Valkyrie answered, their voices creating a harmony that made the air itself seem to glow. The babies in the medical bay chirped along with their elders, their scales flashing with bright, healthy light. For the first time in who knew how long, young Valkyrie were singing with joy instead of crying with pain. And it was all because a small group of humans had chosen to care. The emergency message reached the Galactic Council 3 days after the first Valkyrie babies were healed. Lee Dahi had tried to keep the communication quiet, but news this big could not stay hidden for long. Within hours, every major government in the galaxy knew that humans were somehow healing Valkyrie young. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Dr. Kim Taeho was in the medical bay, helping feed one of the baby Valkyrie. When the first warships appeared in the sky, the little creature in his arms made a happy chirping sound as it ate, completely unaware that death hung in the space above them. Taeho, you need to see this, Park Min-soo called from the main room. His voice was tight with worry. Tejo gently placed the baby Velkari back with its parent and hurried to the communications center. On the main screen was Admiral Korth of the Hegemony Fleet. The man's face was hard as stone, his gray eyes cold with anger. "Dr. Kim," the Admiral said without any greeting, "you have exactly 1 hour to explain what you think you're doing before I turn that entire area into glass." "Admiral, we're providing medical care to—" "You're harboring the enemy," Korth interrupted. "The Velkari have destroyed more worlds than any other force in the galaxy. They've killed billions of innocent people, and now you're helping them breed more killers." Through the window, Tejo could see the adult Velkari moving restlessly. They could sense the danger in the sky, but they didn't attack or threaten. They simply moved closer to their young, ready to protect them. "These babies aren't killers," Tejo said. "They're just children who were sick. We helped them get better." "Children that will grow up to be monsters," Admiral Korth replied. "Whatever twisted bond you think you've formed with these creatures, it ends now. You have 30 minutes to evacuate. Then I'm destroying everything on that planet." The screen went dark. "How many ships does he have up there?" Tejo asked. Dahi checked her instruments. 43 warships. Enough firepower to crack this planet in half. "What about the Velkari?" Dr. Song Hyojin asked. She had been caring for a baby that had arrived just that morning. "There are over 100 adults out there now. Surely they won't just let their children be killed." Minsu shook his head. "Even Velkari can't fight 43 warships. And if they try, it'll just prove to the Admiral that they're dangerous." Tejo looked out at the gathered Velkari. In just 3 days, their small research station had become something like a hospital. Adult Velkari came and went, bringing their sick young and taking away healthy ones. The babies that stayed longer had begun to play together, their scales flashing with bright, happy colors. "We need to show them," he said suddenly. "Show them what?" Junwoo asked. "What's really happening here? The Admiral thinks we're creating an army of monsters. But look around. Does this look like an army?" It didn't. It looked like a nursery. Baby Velkari played gentle games with human caretakers. Adult Velkari shared their knowledge, teaching the humans about crystal technology and energy manipulation. Some of the older babies had even learned to help care for the newer, sicker ones. "Dahi, can you patch me through to the Admiral's fleet?" Tejo asked. "Yes, but he said 30 minutes. It's been 25. Then we don't have much time." The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Korth's bridge. Behind him, Tejo could see weapon officers preparing to fire. "Admiral, please, just give me 5 minutes to show you what's really happening here." "You have 2 minutes, Doctor. Then I'm ending this." Tejo grabbed a portable camera and rushed outside. The adult Velkari watched him curiously but didn't interfere as he approached their young. "Look," he said to the camera. "Really look." He knelt beside a baby Velkari that had been completely gray when it arrived 2 days ago. Now its scales shone with rainbow light. When it saw Tejo, it made a happy sound and nuzzled his hand. This little one was dying when its parent brought it here. Now look at it. The baby Velkari rolled over playfully, showing its healthy belly. "Does this look like a monster to you?" Tejo moved to another group where Hyojin was teaching 3 baby Velkari how to use their natural healing abilities to help each other. When one baby got a small scratch while playing, the other 2 immediately crowded around it. Their scales glowed softly and the scratch disappeared. "They're learning to heal instead of hurt," Tejo explained. "Whatever was wrong with their species, human care is fixing it." He walked over to where Junwoo was working with an adult Velkari on a new type of energy cell. The massive creature was patiently showing the human how to shape crystal with nothing but focused thought. "They're sharing their knowledge with us," Tejo continued, "teaching us things that could help the entire galaxy." Finally, he approached the original parent, the scared Velkari that had first asked for help. The great creature lowered its head and Tejo placed his hand on its snout. The Velkari's eyes closed with what looked like pure gratitude. "This is what we've built here," Tejo said to the camera. "Not an army, a family." He looked directly into the camera, knowing that Admiral Korth and his officers were watching. "You want to destroy this because you're afraid. I understand that fear. The Velkari have done terrible things in the past. But these children haven't hurt anyone. They can't hurt anyone. Human care has changed them at the most basic level." The baby Velkari around him seemed to sense the tension. They moved closer to their human friends, making soft, worried sounds. "If you fire on this place, you won't be destroying monsters," Tejo said. "You'll be murdering children and the people who care for them." There was a long silence. Then Admiral Korth's voice came through the radio. "Stand down weapons," he ordered his crew. "Sir," someone protested. "The Velkari," I said, "stand down." The Admiral's voice was quiet now. "Dr. Kim, I'm coming down there. I need to see this for myself." An hour later, Admiral Korth stood in the middle of what had once been a simple research station. Baby Velkari played around his feet, completely unafraid of the man who had almost killed them. One particularly brave little one tugged at his uniform with its tiny claws, wanting to play. The Admiral knelt down and carefully petted the baby's head. Its scales lit up with joy and it made a sound like purring. "My God," he whispered. "What have we been fighting all these years?" "The wrong enemy," Taeho replied. "The real enemy was the sickness that made them aggressive. We've found the cure." Admiral Korth stood up slowly, looking around at the peaceful scene. Adult Velkari worked alongside humans. Children of both species played together. It was everything the galaxy could be if fear didn't get in the way. "The Council isn't going to believe this," he said. "Then bring them here," Taeho suggested. "Let them see for themselves." The Admiral nodded. "I'll do that. But Doctor, you should know. Not everyone is going to be happy about this. Some people profit from war. Some people need enemies to feel safe. Then we'll change their minds too," Taeho said confidently. "One person at a time if we have to." As the Admiral's shuttle lifted off to return to his fleet, the baby Velkari waved goodbye with their tiny claws. Their parents watched approvingly, making soft sounds of contentment. The first test was over. But Taeho knew it wouldn't be the last. 2 weeks after Admiral Korth's visit, Dr. Kim Taeho made a discovery that changed everything. He was working late in the station's new research lab, trying to understand how human touch could heal Velkari young, when the largest adult Velkari approached the window. This was Veltar, the first parent who had brought sick babies to the humans. Over the past weeks, Veltar had become something like a translator between the two species. The great creature had learned to communicate using simple pictures and sounds. But tonight was different. Veltar carried something in its claws. It was a crystal, but not like the ones that made up Velkari scales. This one was ancient, covered in strange markings that seemed to shift and move in the light. "What is it?" Dr. Song Hee-jin asked. She had been helping Taeho with his research. Veltar placed the crystal against the window and made a deep musical sound. The markings on the crystal began to glow. Suddenly, the air inside the lab filled with images and sounds. It was like watching a movie made of light. "It's some kind of recording device," Taeho said in wonder. The images showed them things that no living being had ever seen. Velkari from millions of years ago. But not the fierce predators that everyone knew today. These ancient Velkari were gentle giants who traveled between worlds, protecting younger species and teaching them about science and art. "They were guardians," Ye-jin whispered. The crystal showed more. Great cities where different species lived together in peace. Velkari parents raising not just their own young, but children from many worlds. Planets covered in beautiful gardens where crystal beings and flesh beings worked side by side. Then everything changed. A wave of darkness swept across the galaxy. It wasn't made of matter or energy, but of something else, something that infected the very essence of life itself. The crystal called it the shadow sickness. The shadow sickness didn't kill. It corrupted. It took peaceful beings and filled them with anger and hunger. It turned protectors into predators. And it hit the Velkari harder than anyone else because their quantum-based bodies were more sensitive to its effects. Taeho watched in horror as the ancient crystal showed young Velkari changing before their parents' eyes. Children who had been gentle and kind became violent and aggressive. Parents who had devoted their lives to protecting others were forced to watch their own offspring become the very monsters they had once fought against. "The parents tried everything," Ye-jin said, reading the information that flowed from the crystal. Medical treatments, quantum therapy, even changing their own bodies to try to help their children. But nothing worked, Taeho added. Generation after generation, the corruption got worse. The crystal showed the final days of the ancient Velkari civilization. Heartbroken parents made the most difficult decision in their species' history. They would exile themselves to the edges of the galaxy, away from the worlds they had once protected. They would let everyone believe they had become monsters, rather than risk their corrupted children hurting innocent people. For millions of years, they've been trying to find a cure, Taeho realized. All those attacks on other worlds, all that destruction. It wasn't conquest. It was desperation. The crystal's glow faded and Veltar made a sound that needed no translation. It was the sound of a parent who had carried unbearable pain for too long. But why do humans affect them differently? Hayajin wondered. Over the next few days, working together with the adult Velkari, they found the answer. Humans had something that no other known species possessed. Bioelectric fields generated by highly developed emotional centers in their brains. These fields resonated at exactly the right frequency to neutralize the shadow sickness. When we care about them, Tejo explained to the rest of the team, really care about them like they were our own children. Our emotions create energy waves that can rewrite quantum programming at the cellular level. So love literally heals them, Li Dahi said. Not just love, compassion, hope, the desire to protect and nurture. All the emotions that make us want to take care of children, even children that aren't our own species. Choi Junwoo looked out at the baby Velkari, playing in the station's expanded nursery area. So we're not just healing these individuals. We're potentially saving an entire species. More than that, Tejo said, we're restoring them to what they were always meant to be. The implications were staggering. If humans could heal Velkari young, they might be able to help other species affected by the shadow sickness. The crystal had shown them that the corruption had spread to many worlds over the millions of years since the initial outbreak. But with this knowledge came new dangers. Word of humanity's unique ability was spreading through the galaxy, faster than they could control. Some species saw humans as saviors, others viewed them as a threat to the natural order. We're getting messages from dozens of governments, Dahi reported. Some want to hire us to heal their own corrupted species. Others are demanding that we stop what we're doing immediately. And some, Park Min-soo added grimly, want to capture us and use our abilities as weapons. That night, as Tejo sat with a group of baby Velkari who had become like family to him, he wondered what they had started. The little ones cuddled against him, their scales glowing with contentment. They trusted him completely, never knowing that their very existence was causing upheaval across the galaxy. One of the babies, a little female they had named Spark because of her unusually bright scales, looked up at him with large, curious eyes. She made a questioning sound. I don't know what's going to happen either, Tejo told her softly, but I promise we'll figure it out together. Spark chirped happily and nuzzled closer to him. Outside, her parent and dozens of other adult Velkari stood guard around the station. They had become protectors again, just like their ancestors. But instead of guarding many worlds, they were protecting one small group of humans who had given them back their children's souls. The ancient truth was out now. The question was, what would the galaxy do with it? From the shadows near the station, 3 figures watched through advanced scanning equipment. They wore the dark uniforms of the Dominion Alliance, one of the galaxy's most powerful military organizations. Confirmed. The lead figure spoke into a hidden communicator. The humans can indeed reprogram corrupted species at the quantum level. Begin phase 2 of the acquisition plan. What if they resist? Another voice asked. Then we take them by force. This ability is too important to leave in the hands of idealistic scientists. The Dominion will control this power one way or another. The figures melted back into the darkness, leaving no trace they had ever been there. But their presence had been noted by other eyes. Ancient eyes that had watched over these humans since the day they first showed kindness to dying children. Veltar's massive head turned toward where the spies had hidden. The great Velkari made a sound too low for human ears, but every adult of his species around the station heard it clearly. The message was simple. Threats approach. Protect the healers. The real test was coming, and this time, it wouldn't be about convincing anyone that humans and Velkari could work together. It would be about proving they could survive those who wanted to tear them apart. The attack came at dawn when the sky was still dark and the twin suns had not yet risen. Dr. Kim Tae-ho was feeding the youngest baby Velkari when the first explosion shook the station. The little one in his arms squeaked in fear and pressed closer to him. Everyone to the safe room, Park Min-soo shouted over the noise. Now. But there was no safe room big enough for all the baby Velkari they were caring for. Over the past month, their small research station had grown into something like a hospital and school combined. 37 young Velkari called this place home, along with their human caretakers. We can't leave the babies, Dr. Song Hyejin said firmly. She was carrying 2 of the smaller ones, their scales flickering with fear. Another explosion, closer this time. Through the windows, they could see dark ships dropping from the sky. These weren't the clean white vessels of the Galactic Council, or even the gray warships of Admiral Korth's fleet. These ships were black as space itself, with weapon ports glowing red like angry eyes. Dominion Alliance, Minsu said, checking his scanner. 50 combat ships, maybe more. The adult Velkari outside were moving into defensive positions around the station. Veltar, the first parent who had brought his children here, stood directly in front of the main entrance. His scales had turned from rainbow colors to deep warning red. "This is Commander Hake of the Dominion Fleet." A cold voice came through the radio. "You have 30 seconds to surrender the human subjects for extraction. Comply and the station will be spared." "Subjects," Li Dahi said angrily. "They're talking about us like we're things to be collected." Teho looked around at his team. These people had followed him across the galaxy to study alien plants. Now they were caught in the middle of a war they never wanted to fight. "We could surrender," he said quietly. "Let them take us. At least the babies would be safe." "No," Yijin said immediately. "If they take us, who's going to care for the young ones? Who's going to heal the new babies that are still getting sick? And do you really think the Dominion will just let the Velkari live in peace?" Minsu added. "They want our abilities as weapons. They'll use us to control every species in the galaxy." The 30 seconds passed. The Dominion ships opened fire, but their weapons didn't hit the station. They hit the adult Velkari. Taiho watched in horror as energy beams struck Veltar and the other parents. The great creatures roared in pain but didn't retreat. They formed a protective circle around the station, absorbing blast after blast from the orbiting ships. "They're using themselves as shields," Choi Junwoo said in amazement. More Velkari were arriving from all directions. They came not with the slow dignity they usually showed, but flying at full speed. Within minutes, over 200 adult Velkari surrounded the station. They linked their foreclaws together, creating a living wall of crystal scales and determination. The Dominion ships increased their fire. The energy weapons that could destroy buildings barely scratched the Velkari's natural armor, but the sheer number of hits was taking its toll. Several adults were bleeding from stress fractures in their scales. "We have to do something," Teho said. "What can we do?" Dahi asked. "We're just scientists." But they weren't just scientists anymore. They were parents to 37 children who needed them. They were partners to an entire species that had placed their trust in human kindness. They were the bridge between what the galaxy was and what it could become. "Junwoo, can you modify the station's power core?" Teho asked. "For what?" "The adult Velkari taught us about quantum energy manipulation. What if we could boost our bioelectric fields? Make them stronger?" Junwoo's eyes lit up with understanding. "Amplify the healing effect." "But that's never been tested. It could be dangerous. More dangerous than letting the Dominion capture us." They worked frantically while the battle raged outside. Junwoo and Dahi rewired the power systems. Heejin gathered all the baby Velkari into the central room. Minsu tried to coordinate with the adult Velkari through hand signals and simple drawings. But as they worked, disaster struck. A Dominion assault ship broke through the Velkari defenses and crash-landed directly into the station's east wing. The impact threw everyone to the ground and started fires throughout the building. "Medical bay is destroyed," Hyejin reported. "We're losing life support in sections 2 and 3. Worse, the crash had separated them from 15 of the baby Velkari. The little ones were trapped in the damaged section, crying for their human parents. "I'm going after them," Teho said. "The whole section could collapse," Minsu warned. "Then we better hurry." They fought their way through smoke and sparking cables to reach the trapped babies. The little Velkari were huddled together, their scales dim with fear. When they saw the humans coming, they cried out in relief. But as they were rescuing the last few babies, the damaged section began to collapse. A massive beam came down directly toward Teho and the baby he was carrying. The beam never hit them. Veltar's massive claw caught it mid-fall. The great Velkari had somehow squeezed through the damaged wall to protect his human friends. His scales were cracked and bleeding, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. "Thank you," Teho whispered. Veltar made a sound that seemed to mean, "Family protects family." They made it back to the central room just as Junwoo finished his modifications to the power core. But the baby Velkari were all crying now, terrified by the explosions and smoke. Their fear was feeding back into their parents outside, making the adults more aggressive and harder to coordinate. The amplification won't work if everyone is scared, Hyejin realized. We need calm emotions, positive emotions. How do we calm them down in the middle of a battle, Dahi asked. Tae-ho looked around at the frightened babies, at his exhausted team, at the chaos surrounding them. Then he did something that seemed completely crazy. He started to sing. It was a simple lullaby from Earth, something his mother had sung to him when he was small. His voice was rough from smoke and fear, but he sang anyway. One by one, the baby Valkyrie stopped crying and listened. Their scales began to flicker with curious light instead of fear. Hyejin joined in, then Dahi, then all of them. As they sang, Junwoo activated the amplified bioelectric field generator. The effect was immediate and incredible. Every baby Valkyrie in the room began to glow like tiny stars. But more than that, their glow spread outward, connecting with their parents outside. The adult Valkyrie scales went from angry red to brilliant gold. Their movements became more coordinated, more purposeful. The change spread from Valkyrie to Valkyrie like ripples on water. Soon, every adult around the station was glowing with the same golden light. They moved as one being, their actions perfectly synchronized. The Dominion ships found themselves fighting not a group of individual creatures, but a unified force that anticipated their every move. Energy beams were deflected by precisely positioned scales. Assault ships were caught by perfectly timed claw strikes. In less than an hour, the battle was over. Commander Hake's voice crackled over the radio one last time. "This isn't over, humans. The Dominion will have you one way or another." But his remaining ships were already retreating, limping away from a battle they had expected to win easily. As the golden glow faded from the Valkyrie scales, Tae-ho felt something he had never experienced before. He was still connected to every baby in the room, could sense their emotions and needs. And through them, he could feel the gratitude and love of every adult Valkyrie around the station. "Did we just create some kind of telepathic network?" he asked. "I think we created something better," Hyejin replied. "We created a family that spans species." Outside, Veltar and the other adults were already beginning repairs on the station. They worked with the efficiency of beings who shared a common purpose and a common love. The Dominion had tested their resolve and found it unbreakable. But Tae-ho knew this was just the beginning. Word of what had happened here would spread. Other forces would come, some friendly, some hostile. But for the first time since this all began, he wasn't afraid. They had proven that love truly was stronger than fear, that family bonds could cross any divide. And if they could create that here, on one small world, maybe they could create it everywhere. 3 months after the Dominion attack, Dr. Kim Tae-ho stood before the largest gathering in galactic history. Representatives from over 400 worlds had come to the neutral space station at Centauri Prime to witness something that many believed was impossible. The Valkyrie restoration ceremony. Tae-ho looked out at the massive assembly hall. Beings of every shape and size filled the seats. Some had traveled for weeks to be here. Others had watched their worlds burn under Valkyrie attacks and never thought they would see this day. "Nervous?" Dr. Song Hyejin asked. She stood beside him wearing the simple blue robes that had become the uniform of human healers. "Terrified," Tae-ho admitted. "What if this doesn't work? What if we've been wrong about everything?" Behind them, 37 young Valkyrie waited quietly. These were the first children to be fully healed by human care. They had grown larger over the past months, but they remained gentle and curious. Their scales shone with every color of the rainbow, marking them as different from any Valkyrie the galaxy had ever seen. The oldest of them, Spark, nuzzled Tae-ho's shoulder with her snout. She had learned to speak a few human words, and her favorite was family. "Family," she said softly, sensing his worry. "That's right," Tae-ho replied, placing his hand on her head. "We're all family here." At the front of the assembly hall, Grand Chancellor Yex of the Galactic Council called for silence. The ancient being's multiple eyes studied the crowd with practiced wisdom. "We gather today to witness a proposal that could change the future of our galaxy," the Chancellor began. "The human delegation claims they have found a way to restore the Valkyrie species to their original nature. If true, this could end millions of years of conflict and death." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some voices were hopeful. Others were angry or afraid. However, the Chancellor continued, Many members of this council believed that some forces should not be changed, that the natural order, however cruel, should be preserved. Representative Orcs of the Zephyrian Empire stood up. His people had lost more worlds to Velkhari attacks than anyone else. The Velkhari are killers, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. They have destroyed countless civilizations. Why should we trust them now? Other voices joined in agreement. The noise grew louder until the Chancellor called for order. The human delegation will now present their evidence, the Chancellor announced. Tejo stepped forward. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. Honored representatives, what if I told you that the Velkhari you fear are not the real Velkhari at all? What if they are victims of the same enemy that threatens us all? He gestured to a large screen behind him. Images began to play, showing the ancient crystal recordings that Veltar had shared with them. The peaceful Velkhari civilization from millions of years ago, the coming of the shadow sickness, the corruption of an entire species. The beings you call monsters were once guardians, Tejo explained. They protected younger species and shared their knowledge freely. The shadow sickness turned them into something they were never meant to be. The hall was quieter now, but many faces still showed doubt. You claim you can heal this corruption, Representative Zara of the Unity Coalition said. But how do we know these healed Velkhari won't simply revert to their old ways? Because they're not just healed, Hyejin said, stepping forward. They're restored. Watch. She nodded to the young Velkhari behind them. Spark and her siblings moved into the center of the hall. The assembled representatives tensed, hands moving toward weapons. These creatures were still large enough to cause damage, even if they were young. But the young Velkhari did something that no one expected. They began to sing. Their voices joined together in a harmony that seemed to touch something deep in every listener's soul. The quantum resonance of their song carried emotions that crossed all species barriers: love, hope, the desire to protect and nurture. As they sang, their scales began to glow with soft, warm light. The light spread outward, filling the entire hall with a sense of peace that many of the representatives had never felt before. When the song ended, the silence was complete. That, Tejo said quietly, is what Velkhari were always meant to be. Grand Chancellor Yex leaned forward in his seat. This is remarkable, but songs and light shows do not prove lasting change. How do we know this effect is permanent? Because they choose it to be, a new voice said. Everyone turned to see Veltar entering the hall. The massive Velkhari had to duck to fit through the entrance, and his presence made many representatives step back in fear. But he moved slowly, carefully keeping his head low in a gesture of respect. I speak for all adult Velkhari, Veltar said, using the translation device that Junwoo had built for him. We have lived with the corruption for millions of years. We have fought against our own nature every day. We have watched our children become monsters and hated ourselves for it. His great eyes looked around the hall, meeting the gaze of beings whose worlds his species had destroyed. We cannot undo the pain we have caused, he continued. We cannot bring back the lives that were lost. But we can choose to be different. We can choose to be what we were meant to be. And what is that? Representative Korex demanded. Protectors, Veltar replied. Teachers. Guardians of the young and defenders of the weak. What humans showed us is not just healing, it is hope. Hope that we can be better than our worst moments. More adult Velkhari entered the hall, moving with the same careful respect as their spokesman. Each one knelt before the assembled representatives, a gesture that would have been impossible for the proud predators of old. We offer ourselves as proof, Veltar said. No, Tejo agreed. Family is never afraid when they're together. Over the following years, the promise they made that day would be tested again and again. The first care center was established on New Geneva, a peaceful world in the Unity Coalition. Then another on Kepler 438c. Then dozens more across the galaxy. Park Minsu became the head of security for the entire healer network, training both humans and reformed Velkhari to protect the care centers. Li Dahi established the first interspecies communication protocols, allowing beings from hundreds of worlds to share knowledge and culture. Choi Junwoo revolutionized space travel by combining human engineering with Velkhari quantum technology. Ships that once took months to cross the galaxy could now make the journey in weeks. And Dr. Song Hyejin discovered that the healing effect worked on more than just Velkhari. Other species that had been corrupted by the shadow sickness or similar quantum viruses began to seek human help. The care centers became hospitals, schools, and cultural exchanges all at once. But perhaps the most important change was in the young. Children of dozens of species grew up together in the care centers, learning that differences in appearance or biology were far less important than kindness and compassion. These children became the first generation in galactic history to see the universe not as a collection of competing species, but as one vast family. 5 years after the restoration ceremony, Tejo stood in the garden of the main care center on New Geneva. Around him, children of 20 different species played together under the light of an alien sun. Human children taught Velkari young how to build with blocks. Young Altarians showed Zephyrian children how to grow singing flowers. Spark, now fully grown but still gentle as ever, was helping a group of mixed species children with their studies. She had become one of the first Velkari teachers, specializing in quantum physics and emotional harmony. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had said no that first day?" Hyojin asked, joining him in the garden. Tejo watched a human child comfort a crying young Nebulan, offering the simple gift of a caring touch. "I try not to think about it," he said. "The important thing is that we said yes, even though it turned our whole lives upside down." "Especially because of that," Tejo replied. "Sometimes the best things happen when you stop trying to stay safe and start trying to help others." A soft chime sounded through the garden, signaling the end of the school day. Children began saying goodbye to their friends and teachers, some heading to dormitories, others to family quarters throughout the center. As the garden emptied, Veltar approached. The great Velkari moved more slowly now, his scales showing the silver traces of age, but his eyes were as warm as ever. "Another message from the council," he said, holding out a data crystal. "3 more worlds are requesting care centers." "That's wonderful," Tejo said, taking the crystal. "Though I'm not sure how we'll staff them all." "The young ones who grew up here are ready to help," Veltar replied. "Both human and Velkari. They understand what we're building better than we do sometimes." It was true. The first generation of children raised in the care centers were now adults themselves, and many had chosen to become healers and teachers. They brought a perspective that neither pure humans nor pure Velkari could offer, the understanding that differences were not barriers, but opportunities to learn and grow. As the twin suns set over New Geneva, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Tejo felt a deep sense of contentment. The galaxy was still vast and often dangerous. There were still those who opposed what they were doing, still species that preferred conflict to cooperation. But in quiet moments like this, surrounded by the children they had helped raise, and the 10 years had passed since the first desperate Velkari parent placed dying children in human hands. Dr. Kim Tae-ho, now director of the Galactic Healing Initiative, stood on the observation deck of the space station that orbited Earth. Through the transparent walls, he could see ships from hundreds of worlds coming and going, bringing children to learn and families to reunite. The Earth below looked different too. What had once been humanity's only home was now the heart of an interstellar community. Cities designed by Velkari architects rose beside human buildings. Gardens planted with flowers from dozens of worlds bloomed in every color imaginable. "Grandfather Tejo," a young voice called. He turned to see a small figure running toward him. It was Lena, a 6-year-old human girl who had been born at the care center on New Geneva. But she wasn't alone. Beside her ran her best friend, a young Velkari named Crystal Song, whose scales shimmered with happiness. "We learned something new today," Lena said excitedly. "Oh? What did you learn?" "Crystal Song taught me how to make light pictures with my hands," Lena demonstrated, and sure enough, tiny sparkles of light danced between her fingers. "And I taught her how to whistle Earth songs." Crystal Song proved this by whistling a perfect rendition of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, a sound that should have been impossible for a Velkari to make. "That's wonderful," Tejo said, kneeling down to their level. "What else have you been up to?" "We're working on a project for school," Crystal Song said in perfect human speech. "We're going to visit the old Velkari homeworld and plant a memorial garden for all the people who were hurt before the healing began. It's going to have flowers from every world that was ever attacked," Lena added, "to show that something beautiful can grow from something sad." Tejo felt his eyes water. These children, who had never known a galaxy divided by fear and hatred, understood the importance of memory and healing better than most adults. "That sounds like a wonderful project," he said. As the children ran off to continue their games, Dr. Song Hae-jin joined him at the observation window. She looked older now, with gray streaks in her hair, but her eyes still held the same compassion that had driven her to heal the first sick Valkyrie babies. "Hard to believe how much has changed," she said. "Sometimes I have to remind myself it's real," Tejo replied. They watched as a transport ship arrived from the Andromeda galaxy. Yes, the healing network had spread that far. Other galaxies had heard about humanity's gift and sent representatives to learn. Some brought their own corrupted species, hoping for the same miracle that had transformed the Valkyrie. "The quarterly reports came in today," Hae-jin said. "Over 3 million young beings have been healed across 4 galaxies. 200 formerly aggressive species have been restored to their original nature. And the resistance movements? Down to isolated cells. Most people have seen the results for themselves now. It's hard to argue against success, it was true. The purist movement, which had once commanded fleets of warships, was now reduced to a handful of extremists hiding in the outer rim. Even the Zephyrian Empire, once humanity's fiercest opponent, had requested healing centers for their own young, after discovering that their legendary aggressiveness was also the result of ancient quantum corruption. Representative Orcs, who had opposed them so strongly at the restoration ceremony, now served as an ambassador to the healing network. His own grandson was among the children being raised in the integrated care centers. "Dr. Kim," they turned to see a young woman approaching. She was tall and graceful, with the distinctive pointed ears of a Zephyrian, but her eyes held the warm compassion that marked all healers. "Zara," Tejo smiled. "How did the mission to the spiral arm go?" Zara had been one of the first mixed-species children to grow up in the care centers. Now she led her own healing missions to distant worlds. "Better than we hoped," she reported. "The Crystalline Collective has agreed to join the network. They're bringing their children to the new center on Tau Ceti next month. Any problems?" "Just the usual concerns about cultural preservation." But once they saw how the Nebulon children have maintained their traditional music and art while learning to work with other species, they were convinced. That had been one of the early challenges. Many species worried that healing would mean losing their cultural identity, but they had learned to separate the corruption from the culture, healing the harmful impulses while preserving the beautiful traditions that made each species unique. "There's something else," Zara continued. "The deep space monitors have detected something interesting in the void between galaxies." She handed Tejo a data pad showing sensor readings from the edge of known space. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "The shadow sickness," Zara said. "Or rather, what's left of it. It's retreating." Tejo stared at the data. The quantum corruption that had infected countless species over millions of years was actually withdrawing from civilized space, driven back by the growing network of healed worlds. "It's like a disease that can't survive in a healthy environment," Hae-jin observed. "Which means we're not just healing individual species," Tejo realized. "We're healing the galaxy itself." As if summoned by their conversation, Veltar arrived on the observation deck. The ancient Valkyrie was one of the few beings who remembered the galaxy before the healing began, and he had become something like a living historian of the transformation. "The children are asking for a story," he said in his deep musical voice. "They want to hear about the old days." "Which story?" Tejo asked. "The one about the scared little humans who decided to trust dangerous strangers with children." Tejo laughed. "We weren't that little." "You were little in the way that mattered," Veltar replied. "Small in numbers, weak in weapons, young as a species. But you had something that all our strength and technology could not create." "What was that?" "The wisdom to know that caring for children is the most important thing any being can do." They made their way to the main gathering hall, where dozens of children from across the galaxy waited for story time. This had become a tradition in all the care centers. The telling of the first contact story, not as a historical record, but as a reminder of what was possible when different beings chose to trust each other. As Veltar began the familiar tale, Tejo looked around at the faces listening. Human children sat beside young Valkyrie. Zephyrian youth shared seats with Nebulon youngsters. Crystalline beings and energy-based life forms followed along with equal attention. "And so the scared parent placed their dying children in the hands of strangers," Veltar was saying, not knowing if those strangers would help or harm. But the strangers looked at the children and saw not enemies but babies who needed care. One of the human children raised her hand. Uncle Veltar, why were the humans not afraid? Oh, they were afraid, Veltar chuckled. They were very afraid, but they were more concerned about helping than they were about protecting themselves. Is that what makes someone a hero? Asked a young Velkari. No, Veltar said gently. What made them heroes was that they didn't think they were being heroic. They just thought they were doing what anyone would do when children needed help. As the story continued, Taiho slipped away to his office. He had reports to review, new missions to plan, and a dozen other administrative tasks that came with running an organization that spanned multiple galaxies. But first, he opened a communication channel to Earth's surface and called his own family. His wife's face appeared on the screen, smiling warmly. Behind her, he could see their 2 children doing homework at the kitchen table. How was your day, dear? She asked. Good, he said. We're expanding to another galaxy next month. And it looks like the shadow sickness is finally retreating. That's wonderful. The children will be excited to hear that. His son looked up from his homework. Dad, my teacher says that before the healing, species couldn't even talk to each other without fighting. Is that true? It's true, Taiho confirmed. But that was a long time ago. It seems silly, his daughter added. Why would you fight someone just because they looked different? Because they didn't know better, Taiho explained. Sometimes it takes time for people to learn that different doesn't mean dangerous. After saying goodnight to his family, Taiho returned to the observation deck. The galaxy stretched out before him, millions of stars representing billions of worlds where beings were learning to live together in peace. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, conflicts, and moments when it seemed like the old ways of fear and hatred might win. But for every step backward, they had taken 10 steps forward. The galaxy was still vast. There were still unexplored regions, still unknown species that might need help. The universe was full of challenges that would test everything they had built. But tonight, as he watched ships carrying children home to families that might include a dozen different species, Dr. Kim Taiho felt something that the galaxy had not known for millions of years. Hope for the future. Not just hope that they would survive, but hope that they would continue to grow, to learn, to become better than they ever imagined possible. The stars shone down on a universe where the strongest bonds were not made of metal or energy, but of love that crossed every boundary of space and species. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The end.